The phone call came on a Thursday, a day so crushingly ordinary that it felt almost insulting. My wife, Jessica, informed me she wanted a divorce. There was no tremor in her voice, no hint of sorrow in her clear blue eyes. It wasn't a confession, it was a pronouncement, delivered with the sterile efficiency of a corporate downsizing. We were in the living room of the house we had spent 12 years painstakingly transforming from a builder-grade box into a home, a sanctuary in the sprawling suburbs of Denver. And she was speaking to me as if I were a line item on a budget that needed to be cut. "It's over, John," she said, her voice crisp. She slid a thick manila folder across the polished surface of our coffee table, the one I had spent a month restoring. "I've retained counsel. These are my proposed terms." I didn't reach for the folder. I didn't need to. The glint of triumph in her eyes told me everything. She was eager to recite her demands, presenting them as a ruthless list of acquisitions. She wanted the house, the one my grandfather had gifted me the down payment for, a place where generations of my family had imagined their children growing up. She wanted 75% of our joint savings, the nest egg we had diligently built. She was demanding spousal support for a minimum of 7 years, a figure that would financially devastate me. It wasn't a negotiation, it was an unconditional surrender she was dictating. When she finished her recitation, she leaned back against the plush cushions of the sofa we'd chosen together, a smug, unassailable confidence settling on her features. "And I don't want a protracted battle over this, John," she said, her tone dripping with a condescending pity that stung more deeply than anger ever could. "Let's be pragmatic. You're a high school woodshop teacher. You make a comfortable living, but you can't afford a real attorney. My lawyer, Mr. Vance, will drown you in motions and legal fees before you ever set foot inside a courtroom. It's far more sensible for you to just accept these terms and we can both move on." I sat there, looking at this woman I had loved, this person I had shared a life with, and a glacial coldness settled deep in my bones. This wasn't just about leaving me, it was about erasing me, about grinding me into dust. She saw me as weak, nothing more than an obstacle to be swept aside on her path to a new life. Her greatest weapon, the one she brandished with such certainty, was my perceived inability to fight back. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I let it hang in the air, a testament to the chasm that had opened between us. Then I met her gaze, carefully schooling my features into a mask of weary resignation, and uttered the 2 words she was banking on, the 2 words that would seal her victory. "You're right." The relief that washed over her face was immediate and palpable. She had won. The simple, unassuming teacher wasn't going to challenge her. He was going to fold, just as she'd predicted. She stood, smoothing the front of her expensive silk blouse. "Good. I'm glad you're being sensible about this," she said. "You'll be served with the official papers sometime next week." Then, without a backward glance, she walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the ruins of our life. Here is what Jessica knew. She knew I was a man of modest means. She knew that my teacher's salary, while steady, did not contain a hidden reserve of tens of thousands of dollars for a high-stakes legal war. She also knew that I had an older brother, a man named Ethan. What she also knew, and what formed the bedrock of her entire strategy, was that Ethan and I had not spoken in 7 years. Ethan is not a teacher. Ethan Sterling is a leviathan. He is, without a shred of hyperbole, the most feared, most successful, and most expensive divorce attorney in the state of Colorado. His name is whispered in legal circles with a mixture of awe and terror. He's a legal predator who views the courtroom as his personal hunting ground. And for the past 7 years he was, for all intents and purposes, dead to me. Our falling out had been catastrophic, a bitter schism that occurred in the raw aftermath of our parents' death. The conflict was over the family home, the house we had grown up in, a beautiful old Victorian in the mountains outside the city. I, the sentimental one, wanted to keep it, to preserve it as a touchstone for our family, a place of memory and future gatherings. Ethan, the ultimate pragmatist, saw it as an illiquid asset, a financial drain tying up capital that could be better utilized elsewhere. He wanted to sell it, divide the proceeds, and move on. The argument that followed was a terrible, brutal thing, filled with words that couldn't be unsaid. It ended with us on opposite sides of a canyon of stubborn, unforgiving pride. We hadn't exchanged a single word since that day. Jessica had been there for the bitter end of that fallout. She had seen my grief and my anger. She saw me as completely, irrevocably cut off from the only powerful connection in my family. In her cold, strategic calculus, my greatest potential asset was a non-factor, a resource that was permanently offline. She was catastrophically wrong. For 5 days after her declaration of war, I existed in a fog of despair. She was right about one thing: I couldn't afford to fight her, not with the kind of lawyer I could hire. The thought of losing my home, my savings, the very foundation of my life, was a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. On the 5th day, I hit the bottom. The hollow echo of my empty future stared back at me. And from that place, there was nowhere to go but up. I gathered every last shred of my pride, the same pride that had cost me my brother for 7 long years, and I found his private cell phone number, a number I hadn't dialed in nearly a decade. My hand was shaking so badly I had to steady it with my other just to press the numbers. I fully expected it to go to his voicemail, or perhaps to be answered by a sharp-tongued assistant paid to screen his calls. But after 2 rings, a familiar, deep baritone answered, a voice I knew as well as my own. "Sterling." "Ethan," I said, my own voice sounding thin and foreign. It's John." A heavy silence descended on the line. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was going to hang up, to simply sever the connection, and the last 7 years of silence would stretch into an eternity. "John," he finally said, the name sounding strange and rusty after so long. "What's wrong?" And like a dam breaking, it all came pouring out. I told him everything. I told him about Jessica's demands, her lawyer's threats, her chilling coldness. And then I told him her final, arrogant taunt: "You can't afford a real lawyer to fight me." Another long, pregnant silence stretched between Denver and wherever he was. When he finally spoke, his voice was transformed. The surprise and caution were gone, replaced by something I hadn't heard since we were kids, since the day he stood up to a bully for me in the schoolyard. It was the sound of a protective older brother. It was the sound of tempered steel. "She said what?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet, each word clipped and precise. I repeated her words, my voice cracking slightly. "Okay," he said, the single word carrying the weight of a final judgment. "When and where is the first court appearance?" "Next Wednesday," I told him, my voice barely a whisper. 9 a.m., at the downtown courthouse. "I'll clear my schedule," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Do not talk to her. Do not talk to her lawyer. Do not sign a single piece of paper. Just be there on Wednesday. I'll meet you there." We hung up. I sat there in the quiet house, my heart hammering against my ribs with a volatile mixture of abject terror and a terrifying, burgeoning hope. Jessica thought she had me disarmed and cornered. She had no idea she had just unwittingly convinced me to press the big red button. She was about to receive a very costly, very public education on the true meaning of family. The morning of the preliminary hearing dawned cold and gray, a miserable Wednesday that perfectly mirrored my mood. I walked into the Denver County Courthouse alone, feeling every bit the part of the defeated man Jessica expected to see. I was wearing my best, and only, suit, a charcoal gray number usually reserved for weddings and funerals. Today, it felt like both. I found the designated courtroom, a sterile, impersonal space that smelled of old paper, floor wax, and latent anxiety. Jessica was already there, seated at the plaintiff's table. She looked magnificent, a vision of corporate power in a sharp navy blue suit, her blonde hair pulled back into a flawless, severe chignon. She looked confident, smug, and ready to execute a hostile takeover. Seated next to her was her lawyer, Arthur Vance, was a man in his late 50s with a florid face and a self-satisfied smirk that seemed permanently fixed in place. They were leaning in, sharing a quiet laugh as I entered. Her eyes met mine, and her smile faltered for the briefest of moments, replaced by a flicker of what looked like pity. She probably expected me to look more shattered. I held her gaze, my expression a carefully constructed blank slate, and crossed the room to the defendant's table. I sat down, placed my worn leather briefcase on the table, and waited. Her lawyer, Vance, stood up and ambled over, his posture exuding an oily condescension. "Mr. Hayes," he began, his voice a low purr. "I'm Arthur Vance. Glad you decided to show up. I trust you've had time to review my client's very generous proposal. If you're prepared to sign today, we can make this quick and painless for everyone." "I'm waiting for my counsel," I said quietly, my eyes fixed on the judge's empty bench. He actually chuckled, a short, barking sound of disbelief. "Your counsel? Mr. Hayes, let's not waste the court's time. Good luck with that." He sauntered back to his table, shaking his head with amusement. A few minutes later, the bailiff called the court to order. The judge, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes and an air of no-nonsense efficiency, entered and took her seat. She glanced down at the docket. "Case number 74B21, Hayes vs. Hayes," she announced. "Are both parties present and represented?" Arthur Vance shot to his feet. "Yes, Your Honor. Arthur Vance representing the plaintiff, Mrs. Jessica Hayes." The judge looked over at me. "And the defendant?" Before I could form a response, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding thud that echoed through the silent room. Every single head swiveled toward the entrance. Walking down the center aisle was my brother, Ethan Sterling. He wasn't just wearing a suit, he was armored in authority, tailored from what looked like spun midnight and pure intimidation. He moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a panther, his gleaming, custom-made leather briefcase swinging at his side. A wave of whispers rippled through the courtroom as lawyers and staff alike recognized him instantly. His reputation preceded him like a shockwave. He didn't acknowledge anyone else in the room. His steel-gray eyes were locked on me. He walked directly to my table, placed a firm hand on my shoulder, and gave it a gentle, reassuring squeeze. Then he sat down beside me, placing his briefcase on the table with a solid, definitive click. The sound seemed to reverberate in the stunned silence. I risked a glance over at Jessica. The smug, confident expression had been violently wiped from her face. It was replaced by a look of horrified disbelief. Her jaw was slack, her perfectly made-up face had gone pale, and her eyes were wide with a dawning terror. She looked as if she had just seen a ghost walk in and take a seat at the opposing table. Her lawyer, Arthur Vance, looked even worse. The color had drained completely from his face, his condescending smirk replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. He knew exactly who my brother was. Every lawyer in the state knew. Ethan leaned over to me, his presence a fortress at my side, ignoring the gaping stares from the rest of the room. "Sorry I'm late, little brother," he whispered, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Traffic was a nightmare." Then he straightened up, his entire demeanor shifting to that of a commanding officer. He looked directly at the judge. "Ethan Sterling, Your Honor," he said, his voice a commanding baritone that filled every corner of the room. "Representing the defendant, Mr. John Hayes." The judge's eyebrows shot up. She knew the name. Everyone did. Then, Ethan turned his gaze slowly, deliberately, toward Jessica. He looked at her, then at her terrified lawyer, and he gave them a cold, predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. "My apologies for the delay," he said, his voice dripping with mock politeness. He let his gaze settle on Jessica, pinning her in place. Then he delivered the line that shattered her entire world. "He doesn't have to afford me," Ethan declared, his voice ringing with clarity. "I'm his older brother." The game hadn't just changed. It had been obliterated. Jessica thought she was attending a surrender ceremony. She had just walked, completely unprepared, into a perfectly executed ambush. Ethan opened his gleaming briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of files, and the demolition began. He immediately rejected all of her initial demands, declaring them predatory, punitive, and filed in bad faith, and announced our intention to file a comprehensive counter-petition. He stated for the record that we would be seeking a full forensic audit of all marital assets and expenditures for the last 3 years, and that we would be demanding Jessica be held responsible for all of John's legal fees. Arthur Vance just stood there, stammering. He was a minnow who had just been cornered by a great white shark. The battle was over before it had even begun. That first day in court set the stage for the 2 months that followed, which were a masterclass in legal warfare. My brother Ethan does not do things by halves. He doesn't just practice law, he wages it with strategic brilliance and overwhelming force. Jessica and her lawyer had planned for a quick rollover. Instead, they found themselves on the receiving end of a relentless assault. The first salvo was a motion for discovery that was both terrible in scope and beautiful in its precision. It wasn't a request. It was an exhaustive demand for every single financial document Jessica had touched for the past 5 years. Vance's motion to have it dismissed as harassing was swatted down by the judge almost immediately. Jessica was legally obligated to produce every last receipt. She thought she was clever, but she had no idea she was dealing with a man who employed a crack team of forensic accountants for sport. While Jessica was drowning in paperwork, Ethan went after her character. He scheduled a series of depositions, not just with her, but with her closest friends and colleagues. His strategy was simple: apply pressure from all sides until the truth was squeezed out. The breakthrough came during the deposition of Jessica's best friend, Megan Albright. After 3 hours of polite but ruthless questioning, Ethan asked a simple question. "Can you tell me about Mr. Preston Carmichael?" Megan tried to play dumb, but Ethan produced credit card statements from a secret account Jessica had been siphoning marital funds into for nearly 2 years. The statements showed a pattern of luxury hotel stays, expensive jewelry, and intimate dinners for two. Faced with the evidence and under penalty of perjury, Megan broke. Preston Carmichael, she admitted, was a wealthy real estate developer Jessica had been having an affair with for 18 months. Suddenly it all made sense. The secrecy, the financial demands, the unshakable confidence. She was strip-mining our marriage to fund her new life with her lover. The deposition of Carmichael himself was even more illuminating. His initial arrogance crumbled under Ethan's questioning. He admitted to the affair and, most damningly, admitted that it was his idea for her to demand the house and exorbitant support, telling her that I would be too poor and too weak to fight back. With these sworn testimonies, Jessica's case was annihilated. A panicked Arthur Vance called Ethan, begging to settle, saying Jessica was willing to walk away with nothing. Ethan's reply was glacial. "No. Walking away is a privilege, and your client has not earned it. We are not settling. We are going to court, and we are going to burn her to the ground." And a war is exactly what she got. 6 months after I first walked into that courtroom, a man who believed he was about to lose everything, the final judgment was delivered. The hearing was a formality. Faced with the mountain of evidence, Jessica had no choice but to surrender completely. The terms my brother drafted were an act of ruthless, poetic justice. Jessica was forced to relinquish all claims to the house. Her demand for spousal support was dismissed with prejudice. And because Ethan proved she had spent over $85,000 of marital assets on her affair, the judge ordered that full amount to be deducted from her share of our savings and returned to me. She left the marriage with a fraction of her original demand, a mountain of her own legal bills, and the public humiliation of having her scheme exposed in court. The fallout was devastating. Her lover, Preston Carmichael, dumped her immediately. Her friends, forced to testify to her lies, distanced themselves from her. In one fell swoop, she lost everything. All because she underestimated the quiet man she was married to. But the most important part of this whole chapter is what happened with my brother. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, Ethan called me. "Meet me at the old house," he said. I drove out to our parents' home in the mountains, the very place that had been the source of our stupid, 7-year feud. I found him on the front porch, just sitting on the steps. We didn't talk about the case or about Jessica. We talked about our dad's terrible fishing trips and our mom's incredible apple pie. Finally, after a long, comfortable silence, he looked at me. "I was wrong, John," he said, his voice quiet. "I was so focused on the money, on the asset, that I forgot what this place really was. It's our home." "I was wrong, too," I admitted. "I was so stuck in the past, I wasn't willing to see that maybe there was a different future for it. We didn't sell the house. We decided to keep it together. We've spent the last few weekends out there, fixing it up. It's no longer a memorial to a past we fought over. It's a project for our future. Working side by side with my brother has healed a wound I thought would be a scar forever." Jessica's final, arrogant shot at me was that I couldn't afford a lawyer. In the end, her greed, her hubris, her belief that I was weak and alone, that was the very thing that forced me to make the phone call that brought my brother back into my life. She thought she was isolating me. Instead, she reunited me with the most important family I have. She tried to leave me with absolutely nothing. But as I stand here today, with my home secure and my brother by my side, I realize I have everything. So, what do you guys think? Was Jessica's downfall deserved, or was my brother's approach too harsh? Have you ever had a moment where family came through for you in a completely unexpected way? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe for more content, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss an update.